hard in here so you can do hard out there. But literally the day I got my commercial helicopter license, she rang me up and she went, do you want to come back and buy a helicopter company? I just went, yes. I instantly went, yes. I don't know why. I'm living in Canada. Yes. And I also recognised that my license agreement was the true value of my business. You either buy all of me or none of me. If I stepped away from the business or I went off to lunch with a friend or something, I felt guilty if I took 2 hours of going, I'm doing something else. So is that mindset being around how people change because the perception of all of a sudden now I was a different or a better person because I had money, because I was buying, I became interested. It's an interesting way to human psyche of how we treat people. It was 3 years. He fired me 3 times, but kept bringing me back. And the amount of conversations I've had with people when they're coming in there, they're rushing in, they've been late or they're on the phone because they've got a deal going on and they're talking to someone. I said, you've just got to stop and think, what are you doing now? Then the helicopter game and aviation and a lot of other things, if you don't stop and think about what you're doing right now in the moment, there's a real chance.
Hi, I'm Josh, and welcome to Two Commas. I've been taking feedback from people, and it's really welcomed. Please do reach out if there's something you'd like to share about the show. One of the things is that my background is very tech-oriented, and as a consequence, the folk that I've had on the show are quite tech-oriented. Today is one of the deviations from that. I have Roy Crane, who was the owner of Orbit Helicopters. Fascinating background and story, and so we get to cover a range of different bits and pieces over the journey of this conversation. But Roy, really stoked to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. As you know, I always like to start these conversations with a bit of a backstory. We've spoken on a few occasions, but nobody knows who Roy is, so please introduce yourself to the audience in whatever way you see fit.
Sure. I arrived in New Zealand about 20 years ago, 2003, came here. I came from Hastings in the UK, grew up there. My mum worked in the hospital. My dad was a landscape gardener. He self-taught himself. And in my late teens, I applied to be in the RAF. Couldn't get in there. So through a few iterations, one of them being a DJ for a while for the BBC, I ended up in finance for about 12 years in London. So then I had the opportunity of getting in out, and I did. I travelled for a year, came here. I'd always wanted to do my helicopter license, and at that point, I had the means to be able to do it. So I did my private license, went back to the UK. I ran another finance company, and then a couple of years later, after a stint in Canada, I actually then got the opportunity of going, did I want to come and buy a helicopter company? So I did. I was 35. I thought, why not? I was going to live in Canada, and I didn't. So I turned turtle, came back down here, and 20 odd years later, here I am.
Love it. So I was an aspiring DJ at university, and I actually still, to this day, spin tunes, not terrifically well, but I play parties and events, and I played Stony Ridge last weekend, funnily enough.
Oh, well done here.
And so thank you. But for those that end up in a microphone DJ radio station situation, that's kind of a career path they chose to have, and yet you were there by accident. I'm curious about why that wasn't something that you went to do for a longer term, and it just ended up being a blip in your career kind of trajectory.
It was a part-time gig. It got me through senior school. I started when I was 15 on decks, and I used to lug in about 10 boxes of records at the time. But I used to do a lot of nightclubs, a lot of parties, birthdays, all those kind of things, weddings. And then I did some work experience at BBC Radio Sussex at the time, Brighton, then Sussex. So then that morphed into, would I do a little stint after the Top of the Pops thing? So I did that, but it got me through. It paid for my car and my tape deck and all those things before I went off and got a real job.
Isn't that funny? At that stage, was it not considered a real career path? Was that the hesitation for you?
It was, and I wrote to a lot of Radio 1 and Radio 2 jocks and tried to get in down that route. and just I couldn't get any traction.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
it was, yes, I would have loved to have done it.
Yes.
Just didn't turn out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So successful career in finance,
Yep.
and then decided to buy a business. Tell me about that kind of transition, because you worked for others over the course of your finance career in ever-increasing seniority of roles, and ended up in a senior leadership role.
Yep.
And so then you transitioned into being an owner of a company. What was that transition like?
It was really, in hindsight now, it's really bizarre because you're right. Working for, as we know, working for yourself as opposed to working for someone else is a different mindset. And I struggled for quite some time, for a number of years, because I had yes, I'd ran and led big teams of people for other people in big companies. But actually then when your own money is now in the bank account and you're paying the bills, it took me several years to try and get out of, the work ethic of, I turned up at 8 o'clock, I was there all day long. And then if you need to do whatever, you did that. But then I felt guilty if I stepped away from the business or I went off to lunch with a friend or something. I felt guilty if I took 2 hours of going, I'm doing something else. So it's that mindset that it took me some time to actually get out of. Now, obviously 20 odd years later, I think in some way I'm unemployable because I can't go back to the other way of doing it, because now that's far too rigid,
Yeah. That's interesting. The mindset was one of the key things you talked about first. What about some of the mistakes that you made along the way of transitioning from employee to owner?
I wouldn't say I can't remember making necessarily mistakes. But and the reason I say that, I had some really good mentors. The people whose business I bought, one of them stayed in there for a couple of years. The other one, whose share that I bought out, he remained great friend, great mentor. So we was always sparring off each other, and also the nature of the business. So when I came in, the predominance of our client base was successful business people. So, and I got to know them well, really quickly. And so I had this effectively a great board of informal directors that I could spar and I could ask and feel that I could ask those questions to and go, what do you think about this? So I was learning two things. I was learning, one, how to run a business, but I was also at the same time learning how to be a helicopter instructor, because our core business then was teaching people how to fly helicopters. So I was learning both things and trying to stay alive at the same point, both physically and also then in business. So, but I had a really great group that I could call on their experience.
Yes.
Which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like the origin story for you is one of working class boy done good. Would you say that's correct? You said your dad was a landscape gardener and your mum was in the service industry.
Yep.
Is that a fair thing for me to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, without putting labels on it, but we didn't. I mean, growing up, I had my brother's secondhand clothes. It was that kind of. I had a happy childhood. I can't remember not having a happy childhood. It was, but it was what it was. But I went to school. I loved school. I loved the sports in school. I did okay. I wish I got better grades so I could get into the RAF at the end of it.
Is that what prevented that from happening?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then, so I just didn't get a knock of actually going through to try and get in there. So I think I did well, but university was not for me. And so, yeah. But bizarrely, I've always thought, from as long as I can remember, everything was going to be okay. I've always known through all my teenage years that I was going to live overseas. I was going to travel, bearing in mind I'd never traveled, right? My parents didn't have the money. It might be a camping trip. But I always knew, and I don't know where that came from, that I was going to have a good life. And I don't know where that's come from, but it's always maintained that all through the roller coaster of my life. Is I've always known, even in those tougher times, of going, everything's going to be okay. It's a time thing. Yeah. Bizarre.
Yeah, you mentioned that you had a happy childhood when I was talking about the start that you had around, the working class thing. And again, forgive me for using that terminology.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth dwelling on because too often today we can equate money with happiness.
Yes.
And I'm sure you know that money does not bring happiness. It takes away some problems.
Yeah.
But there is no kind of direct correlation between those two things. I think, in fact, they say they've established that once you get into the $100,000 or above, your happiness peaks at that level.
Yep.
And so when you've been in a situation where income may be greater than that, many, many times greater than that, or even a little bit greater than that, it's the threshold is about $100,000. And so I grew up in a largely single-parent household, and we had absolutely nothing at the very start of my life. And then some assets, and my stepdad came along and started to accumulate some things over time, and got some insight through some experiences that he brought as well.
Yep.
But we didn't know any different to what we knew. So I had secondhand clothes as well, and I remember one Christmas getting a bike, which was my first bike, and it was my neighbour's old bike, and they got it from another neighbour. And I was just so excited to have a bike, right?
Yeah.
Because a bike meant early versions of freedom.
Correct.
And so I think we were very privileged. We're of a similar kind of age and stage, and very, very privileged to not have the consumer-oriented generation, the devil of comparison that exists today, and, everything kind of social feeds and, billionaires and that sort of stuff didn't exist when we were kids. And so kind of grounded a lot of the orientation that we probably have as human beings today. I am curious, however, you went on into a career that you succeeded in, and there wasn't necessarily the role models in your home or possibly where you grew up as well. So how did you take and find inspiration?
That's a really good question. I know in my 20s and 30s, I read voraciously of autobiographies of a range of people, adventurers, business people, politicians. The guiding theme in there was people who had come from nothing, and they had a will and a desire and an ambition, and they followed that through. But they all went through peaks and troughs and everything else. There's very few people in all of those people that I read then, and still probably now, that have come from with a silver spoon in the mouth. So I think if you have that inner desire to do well and the best out of you, you will find it, or it will find you, I think. And then it's knowing how to navigate that to take it to the next level, I suppose. In those early days, I'm not sure. I looked up to my dad through his business. He went through some health issues. He had a really bad back. I was about, early teens then. His business partner was not great. His business folded. He had about 10 guys working for him in the late 70s. His business partner didn't step up. And I saw the collapse of my dad's small business and his health as well. And then he spent the next, probably for the rest of his life, bless him, he was a taxi driver. He was a window cleaner. He was all those things. But I still remember going out. He worked in a factory, and then he thought, I'm going to be a landscaper. He worked in a factory. He thought, I'm going to go and teach myself. And then I'll go out and estimate with him. And he would go and see a house. There was no camera, so he would literally look at it. He would draw it, and then he would estimate it. So he presented to the client base. Here's a watercolor drawing. This is what I can turn it into. So he had that, right? He had that, I suppose, that early entrepreneur spirit of going, because he was brought up in a bad house. Not a bad house, but a working class house. But he had that desire to do better for himself. So I suppose, and then in our community, there weren't those successful people. They were the plumbers, the electricians. They were the smaller guys. But that was his journey. But I saw the impact of what happened when it didn't go well and he couldn't recover. And then he spent all that. And I think I just went, I do not want that for me.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe drove me into some of the directions that I went, that I don't want that. I want to do better.
Yeah. So within your dad, you saw a desire to achieve and a thwarting along the way,
Yep.
but yet a continued drive to keep going. So that probably inspired you in some way.
Yep.
You filled your mind with the stories of successful adventurers, founders, discoverers, which kind of gives you inspiration along the way as well.
Yeah.
I'll take a quick side note here. I spoke at an event last evening, which was about fundraising for female-founded companies.
Yep.
And I had some trepidation about being invited to speak at this event, as I am clearly a middle-aged white male. And so on this show, on the podcast, I've had 50% rejection from the females that I've asked to come on the show and a 95% acceptance rate from the men that I've asked to come on the show. And so I spoke to Tina, my wife, about it. And she said, it's a real challenging thing that we need to overcome because a lot of women are reticent about sharing their story. And her words were, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so I echoed those words, and that became a meme for the evening that all four of the other speakers talked about. And it was something that I think that everyone took away. But one of the questions that I was asked was, I have been knocked back by many people for fundraising, and they've all been men, and many of them have told me that my business idea is unfundable. How do I get these negative male voices out of my head? And I said, this is funny. Tina and I are learning Spanish at the moment.
Yep.
And I'm waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning with these Spanish voices in my head, and I only understand half of what they say. Yep. But the words are there.
Yep.
And so I said, there are so many stories of incredibly powerful, resistant, strong, focused, smart women that are out there, from Mary Shelley, who invented sci-fi and Frankenstein, all the way through to Arianna Huffington, who reinvented modern media. And everyone in between there. So make it your business to consume as many of those things as you can. Fill your life and fill your mind with their stories, because then that will become your voice and the stories that you hear. And so that's what I'm hearing from you. You had the inside, keep going determination, but then the stories and the things that came from the outside. So very, very powerful kind of series of messages that were coming through. So arrived in New Zealand, early 2000s. You, I imagine, didn't have a network that was here. You went about buying a helicopter company. You hadn't owned a helicopter company before. You could fly one. So tell me about the early days of getting into that business.
I got to live in Canada. Yeah. I met some Canadians. They said, come stay. And I went. And I fell in love with Canada. Applied, got residency. I had to come back here, do a quick flight check, and then I'm going to live in Canada. I rented out my house, which was this beautiful house in the Garden of England, but I'm now going to go and live in Canada, and that's fine. Got there and I thought, well, what do I do? So I got in there on my finance background. Then, so I thought, I'll do my helicopter license. I'll do my commercial helicopter license. I don't know what else I'm going to do. Okay, for the next 3 months, I'll do this. So I then just trained, did my commercial license. That's it. But the seed, when I came here to do my flight check, Anne, who owned the business, I stayed with her and her husband down at Ariwa, and we sat there one night drinking a bottle of wine, looking at the sunset, and she was asking me marketing and sales ideas of where she could take her business. And I was just going, well, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, blah, 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 right? And that was it. I'm going to live in Canada. Off I go, come back. But literally the day I got my commercial helicopter license, she rang me up. And this is, Skype had only just started. There was no, so this was and she went, do you want to come back and buy a helicopter company? And so I just went, yes. I instantly went, yes. I don't know why. I'm living in Canada. Yes. And I went back. I spent a summer working in a pub, selling this beautiful home, which I thought I was never going to sell because it was just like, it was success for me. It was a token of success. But I knew I could come and live in New Zealand. I could buy a helicopter company and I could buy a house and still have some change left over. When I worked in this pub, no one knew me, and it was on a quintessential English country ground. And for the first 2 weeks, just got to know some people. And then one of these guys sitting around the bar one day said to me, and I was on £4 an hour, and he said, "Can I ask?" I said, "Why is a mid-30s guy who's clearly smart? What are you doing working in a bar?" And I just said, "Oh, I'm going to New Zealand to buy a helicopter company." I remember it clear as day. And there was about 5 people sitting around there, and it was quite a well-to-do area. And then all of a sudden, everyone's attitude towards me changed. It was like a Richard Branson. I don't know if you've seen it when he did the version of The Apprentice.
I didn't see it, no.
Great. He did a Trump version. He did his version, and I remember the first episode of it, and I still reflect on it sometimes now. 16 contestants get picked up in a black London cab, drive to Oxfordshire mansion, meet Richard Branson. Now they're going to do the first episode is climb on top of the balloon. But he gets there, everyone lines up, everyone's all excited. And he went, "Unfortunately, 2 of you haven't made it." And they're all like looking at each other going, "Well, this is bizarre. We've only just got here." And he went, "Tell me about the London cab ride that you had." And they basically set up cameras in the cab. He was the black cab driver, and he put on a whole bunch of cosmetics. And so they didn't know. And how they treated the black cab driver, they said, "You are not the right fit for the Virgin Group of companies culture." And having that then experience myself of being around how people change because the perception of all of a sudden now as a different or a better person because I had money, because I became interesting. It's an interesting way into human psyche of how we treat people based on class, money. And it's just stayed with me. I don't know if that did not answer the question at all, but I think it's guided a lot of the decisions I've now taken in life. And I think the people that I've met since I've been here, I had a really soft, easy, I've moved to a different country. I got to know a lot of people quite quickly through the helicopter game. Lovely people opened their arms up and invited me in. Interestingly, though, for me, 18 months after being here, having a really soft landing in some respects, I sat on the edge of my bed one day and I bawled my eyes out. And I felt so lonely. And the reason I felt so lonely was because I hadn't had that history of connections and my friendships from the past 35 years. I'd been here 18 months and I had a really great, but it just became all of a sudden in that moment overwhelming of going, I don't have my true friends. Now, obviously I do, but it was an interesting look into my psyche actually of going, what was I missing?
It's interesting. You and I met at a social function and I have a fairly firm rule that I will never ask someone what they do for a living unless it's the thing that they want to get into as a conversation, which they'll express by asking me what I do.
Yep.
I have some difficulty answering the question because I have what's called a portfolio life anyway, and it can make some people feel a bit uncomfortable if I talk honestly about what it is that I do, because I manage investments and I run a podcast and I advise people on how to put value in their businesses and sell it for many millions of dollars, and people like to level set.
Yes.
And so what the people were doing in the pub with you was they had level set as you being a Mia. I don't think that's the case at all. I think service is a wonderful space to be in. but a mere barman, and then they found out you weren't a mere barman, and so they changed the way that they treated you.
Right.
And my distinct recollection of our first interaction was a very jocular and a fun one, and somehow we got onto the subject of you having owned and sold a helicopter company. But I think that might have even been later that I found that out.
It was later, right?
And then we met at another event and we had the conversation. I'm like, hey, I've got this podcast that's all about people that have sold their companies. You should come on to this thing.
Yep.
And so I, in my 20s, went to live and work in the UK, and I had a not dissimilar moment, but a bit sooner than what yours was. And I think that I probably reflected later on when I was in my 30s, it's a lot harder to make close friends when you mature. And in your early 20s, it becomes a lot easier. So I remember being lost, getting on the wrong train, ending up in the wrong part of the city, not having a job, struggling to have anyone take me seriously at interviews. And I had a similar, kind of wing kind of moment. And I'm not demeaning the moment that you had, by the way, because we all have those. But from those tends to come the, okay, I need to do something about this kind of thing. And so I have this sense about you, Roy, that you've got a deep knowing about things because you're quite clearly an intuitive person. The knowing that's inside you that I will be okay, the knowing that this is the right thing to do by this helicopter company, and then the knowing that I probably need to change some of the things in my life about who I have around me and, kind of build some meaningful friendships, I suspect would be the subtext to that.
Yes.
Am I right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So you owned the helicopter company. You'd never owned a helicopter company before.
No.
What are some of the early kind of inflection points that you had in picking up this business that was a successful company from other people? Actually, no, I'm going to go back a step. How was the deal structured for you to buy this business in the first place? In as much as you can share.
Oh, I can share all of it. Happy to, if it's interesting. Came in and then her business partner, John. John's son, very successful angel investor, an accountant by trade, done very well, and I trusted them both. I trusted Anne and John implicitly. So Anne said to me, "Come here, if it all works out well in 6 months, then we'll look at that ownership structure." Great. So I did sell everything up. I put everything. I went, yep, I'm going to come here. I bought a house early on within a couple of weeks, and I'd gone, right, I am going to do this. So I was in boots and all. Come 6 months later, well, right now, how do we do this? So we literally with Andrew, we said, well, how do we value the business? We sat down in a room. Andrew goes, this is worth this. This is worth this. Probably there's a range. Midpoint's about here. Does that seem fair? And we all just looked at each other and went, yep.
Wow.
That was it.
Remarkable.
So now that's either remarkable or naive on my part. But I think it was, and this can go, as we all know, this can either work in your favor or not when you really trust people, because there are lots of experiences that we've probably all come across where you do trust and everything else and it doesn't work out the way that you think it's going to work. But I did. I just completely trusted them, and I still do to this day. Anne is still one of my close friends. 20 odd years later, we've been in business, and she's still a close friend. John unfortunately passed away last year. So it was the right decision. It was the right decision.
Tell me when, if that has not worked in your favor. So I'm curious to scratch this trust thing a little more, because trust is, in New Zealand, certainly, I call us a trust-based economy.
Yeah.
We are not very litigious. It's expensive to pursue things in a court environment anyway.
Yeah.
And the setup is such that the returns or the rewards for doing so are actually not all that great. It's not like the States or Australia, which are both very, very litigious societies. And so in New Zealand, we look a person in the eye and we shake their hand. And in my experience, 80 to 90% of the instances, things proceed on the basis that you would hope that they do and you intended to from the outset.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there are some industries which are notorious for that not being the case. the property space is one of those.
Yep, and I'm in that too.
Right. We'll come back to that.
Yep.
And automotive is another. And I am passionate about European cars, particularly sports cars, and the property thing. I've done that for a long time.
Yep.
And so those are the things that I have learnt to not trust. But talk me through your experience. And I'm curious if you have not had many, because then you've got this instinct is where I'm going with this. But have you had many instances where you have trusted and there's not worked out in your favour?
I think we all have, and without going into specifics, that I think we have this gut instinct, and I think, and I'm not sure it's a function of age. I don't want to be ageist about this or experience-based about this. I think if you have a gut feeling inside of you and listen to it inside of you, normally that is the right thing, right? I think the other thing that I'm still learning is actually everyone else they've got a story. They've got stuff going on in their life, which they make decisions and say things because of what's going on in their life or experiences that they've had, or they've been hurt, or they've succeeded, or whatever. So that forms who they are now. They're sitting in front of you, shaking your hand, looking in your eye and going, I'm going to, this is who we are. Great. And then otherwise, and then events sometimes conspire against them. So with the best will in the world, you can do everything else, but then a curveball comes in and then it will affect that particular position. So I think the more that you can try and to look in someone's eyes and try and go, tell me, is this the deal or is this not the deal? Are you there or are you not there? Please be honest with me. And I'm trying now to be a more honest version of that. We all fail, but actually try and go, this is who I am. This is where I am and this is where I'm going. Is that yes or no for you? And I want people to give me that honesty back, really. But again, that's a whole bunch of other stuff that will sit around that.
Apologies for the interruption, and thanks for listening to the show. These shows take resources to build and put together. We have a team of producers, we have some promoters behind the scenes, and of course we have the guests that generously give their time to come on the show. My only ask of you is that you go and check out my website. I advise founders on how to build value and how to navigate the exit process successfully. We have a diagnostic on the website. There's an ebook that I've written. There's a free chapter of my upcoming book, Wantrepreneur, on there. So I'd just urge you to take a couple of minutes and go and check out joshcomrie.com. That's interesting. My approach to trust is in sectors, if I have a deep knowing about someone and I have just a feeling that this is good, they're not just saying the right things, but they're acting in the right ways.
Yeah.
I think Benjamin Franklin said that the older that I get, the more that I watch not what a man says, but what he does.
Yes.
Yeah. So actions speak louder than words. I've had an experience with a business partner historically and other people that I have been in and around business with that have said one thing and then done something quite different. So I very, very clearly focus on the actions, not the words. And in segments, for example, unfortunately, the building and construction space, what I've learned to do is to trust and. So I make sure that the agreement is in place and that it's signed and that it's a well-written document. It has been examined by people that know more about that kind of thing than I do, for example.
Yeah.
So trust and, I'm going to work with you. That's the trust factor. But I also make sure that I dot my I's and cross my T's along the way. Whereas in other segments, tech, for example, is one that is actually runs really well on trust in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And so you'll often kind of, look someone in the eye and agree on something, and then the documentation will come, a long way down the path, and it hasn't let me down.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting notion. So the helicopter business, it was a training company when you bought it. So tell me what you did with this company.
I kept it the same and I came here going, I'm going to buy this, but I'm going to do some other businesses. Yeah. And but then it became more consuming. It's not one of those unless you got some people in place. It wasn't one of those, and I was inexperienced at the business, and I was inexperienced as an instructor. So I needed to be in there on a daily basis to learn my craft on both of them, and then just became all consuming. And everything was going great. Then I started about 2006, 2007, looking at other companies, cash-based companies, video shops, fruit and veg shops to invest in, but not be in. And then a friend of mine, he bought me a deal late 2007. Very successful guy. Was I interested as a minor shareholder in Paramount and DreamWorks Pictures? So helicopter game was going great, building that up, and so went into that. 3 other guys were in there. There was a $6 million buy-in, and I was in there as a silent shareholder. So I mortgaged my house because I was mortgage free. So I mortgaged my house up, put the money in there. We signed the deal. A month later, the world goes into GFC. The long story short was we got absolutely caned. 18 months later, we paid out everything, but our business, we lost that. We had PGs in place. So then they came back for a second bite of the cherry, and court cases and everything else, which we were all winning. But the washout was 4 or 5 years later, I managed to survive. I nearly lost the helicopter business. That got very skinny, because successful business people now weren't learning how to fly helicopters.
Yeah.
Right? It's a luxury item.
So you had a situation where you had a increased amount of residential debt, which you didn't have before. You had to fund that debt. The mechanism of funding was the helicopter company, which was a declining revenue situation because people's disposable income had reduced. And so you're starting to kind of freak out. Yep. What happens next?
Freak out, did all this kind of thing. A friend of mine said, very successful business guy said, because everything was in one trust, you need to diversify your trusts, get out, you need time on your side because the PG was going to be another big chunk of cash, which I didn't have. You need time. So got on some really good accountants and lawyers. We didn't hide anything, but we structured things that, there was some potential survivability through this. My marriage went under at the same time through that stress. And then a very polarizing character came along who I started to fly a little bit. And then he asked me to be his full-time pilot and then come in and help maybe manage his mansion. And so I went down that route. And the reason I went down that route was there was a decent salary in there that I could actually now, top up the helicopter business, but also I could pay, the debts that were outstanding. So I grabbed it with open arms. Plus, it was a bit high octane stuff. It was a very interesting time. That was 3 years. He fired me 3 times, but kept bringing me back. So, because I just said, well, this is the fact, but it got me through. And with that money as well, I invested in the business. We were purely focused on one target segment, which was predominantly 95% was white, middle class, successful business men, not many females coming through. But there was an opportunity of, if I got NZQA and if I got civil aviation approved for all the things that we did, and we had these programs, so that actually we might be able to get some government student funded places as a tertiary education provider. So I invested about 2 years, big chunk of cash into doing that. There was no guarantee of this, but I said, I thought I had to do something different. I had to change the business model because otherwise we were going to die. And luckily, 2012, 2013, we started coming out of that. And then 2 big firms went broke. and in the helicopter game who were very focused on, they were wholly focused on the student loan funded model, and it was easy money. And I didn't want big numbers. I just wanted a small amount of people that I could train a year that weren't able to access funding, but were passionate about being helicopter pilots and we're going to go through and make it as a career. So 2013, we got the nod that we were chosen, and we ended up being the only North Island provider for the Ministry of Education. And then that took us on a great trajectory. So I still had the VIP client base, but now I've got this, and I 300% increase in revenue in the next 2 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it was a massive, and got me through.
We're going to relay some of the key points as I heard from you there. So you landed in a situation which was not really of your doing, but it was taking a risk on an investment opportunity, which we all do at time to time.
Yep.
And that unfortunately very quickly turned against you.
Yep.
And so you had to make a decision about maintaining an asset, a business asset, through a decision which perhaps wasn't on the original plan, but it was one that was there and it provided you the opportunity for cash flow to come through the door. You were very clear about your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and double down, triple down on focusing on those folk, but then also realizing that competitively the landscape around you was changing and that people were going to the wall, which opened up a space inside the market for you to be able to build new capability and therefore derive new revenue. And so that enabled you to position yourself over the period of 3 or 4 years, whilst no doubt was some fairly tense and unpleasant moments because you were going through a divorce as well, and there was probably the family home, and there was probably kids and other stuff that was involved as well, that you were able to position the business so that it could have this massive growth over a couple of year period, 300% over 2 years. Is that correct?
Yep, you did.
Yeah, amazing. Okay. So here's a question for you, Roy. I had a not dissimilar story over the GFC, not the divorce that came later, but GFC 2009 was a brutal, brutal year in business for me. And I did some things within my business which turned out to be subsequently very, very smart things. And I had a similar 300% growth in the next 18 months. And so turned that business from being a mid-market player into being the market leader over time. Unfortunately, my health suffered. I have an autoimmune disorder which flares up under stressful conditions. And so I basically made the decision that I wasn't going to socialize or see anyone beyond my family and a couple of really close friends and my then wife. For a period of about 9 months, I had to sacrifice something, and it was connection and social time. And so it enabled me to focus on the business. And then I started to buy commercial industrial property later that year, 2009. The next 5 years were a wonderful time to buy those assets. So it really kind of set me up for life. And so I look back upon that period of my life as being one that was brutal, very, very hard, but I would not change any of it. Would you change any of your experience?
I think, and we've spoken about this before, I think in an ideal world, do you want to go through that to come out the other end and it's been successful for both of us? Does it make us, it does, it shapes us who we are. Of course it's going to do that, those experiences. Do you actually want to go through that? Do you want to live would it be better if the light at the end of the tunnel and that journey is a lovely one and it's not a roller coaster and you don't have to sacrifice your health and your friends and all those, of course, right? But it made me have to make those decisions, right? And probably if I didn't, then maybe, who knows? It's sliding door moment stuff, right? But yes, I'm glad in a way it's built even more resilience in me and it's shaped me who I am. Of course it has, but could I have wished it was differently? Yes, I would.
It's a paradox, really, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I firmly believe this. So they've profiled successful people and they've established that the one consistent thing that exists within successful people is resilience. Grit, determination, same words, different words, same thing. And so what I know about resilience is that you can't watch it on YouTube, watch a documentary, read a book about it. You don't develop resilience from observation of another's experience. You have to go through the fire yourself to become strong. I use the forging analogy, forging of steel. And so for those that are unfamiliar with forging of steel, it's imagine a Japanese sword getting made, and it's a piece of steel. It gets shoved into burning coals, embers, and then the shit gets banged out of it with a hammer, and then put in some water, and then that process gets repeated. And they fold the steel to make this sword. And the strongest swords in the world, that happens 33 times.
Yeah.
You can't fold a piece of paper, by the way, more than 9 times, I'm told. I haven't tried this, but 9 times you'll be the thickness of the earth. I keep folding a piece of paper. So they do this with steel and it becomes incredibly strong. And so it's interesting because for all of us that have been through these journeys, they are hell in the moment. You wouldn't have chosen to go into them, yet they get where we are.
Yep.
They get us to where we are.
Yep.
And so what I say to people that are considering a path that might be a difficult path in front of them, I have a simple expression. I say, everything you want is on the other side of something hard.
Yeah.
Therefore, do the hard thing.
Yeah.
And so you've done the hard thing. You wouldn't necessarily have chosen to do that hard thing. And here we are. So that's kind of my reflection on that journey, if I may.
Which is another interesting thing is about, I mean, I've started CrossFit in this last year and
Brutal.
And it's absolutely brutal. And every day, and I'm inspired and in awe of the people around me where I go, I've never seen such fitter and stronger men and women in my life. And I've been healthy most of my life, in gyms. And I'm going, but every single day, it is brutal. And then you're going, why are we doing this? But the outcome of that is you're getting a strong, lean, fit body, which, they said this, Jesse said this the other day, of going, it's hard in here, so you can do hard out there.
I love that.
And I hadn't heard that before, but it got me through that session. And actually, it's so true.
Yep.
So true. So yeah, you're right. Forward still, hard work.
Yeah.
Leads somewhere else.
And again, a paradox is that what we have invented or created for ourselves in this world that we live in today is one of comfort. And everything's cooled, heated, massaged, food's brought to you, delivery, everything, immediate, on tap. There's a comedian, Ronnie Cheng, who's got this bit about I want Amazon, I think he calls it perception. It's you need to know what I want before I want it, and then break into my house and place it gently in my hand so that I have it immediately. And he's joking, but of course that's kind of the world that we've ended up living in, and yet we've forgotten that the way that we become strong, resilient, and therefore capable is through doing hard things by choice. Be they physical exertions, such as the sporting things, be they, I hot and cold. I have an ice bath every day. I was in 5.5 degree water at 45 this morning. And do I want to do that every day? No, I don't. Do I know it's good for me? It's amazing for me.
Yep.
And then went to the gym and did the training and all that sort of stuff. And I'm telling you things that you kind of already advocate for and about. So let's go back to the helicopter business for a bit.
Yes.
So very relevant and appropriate diversions that we're taking here, though, Roy. I was talking to my wife last night about a friend that has just purchased a home staging business, a furniture business.
Yep.
And I always like to look at businesses and go, what are you solving for? What's the problem that you're solving for? And you can get where this question's going, so you might want to ponder it. But in that business, that's a logistics problem, right? Yep. Because you're essentially having to move around furniture to places and making sure that you've got somewhere to put them and you've got as minimum downtime as you possibly can.
Yep.
A piece of furniture becomes like a human in a services company, for example. If you run a consulting firm, that's a services company. And so therefore the problem you're trying to solve is utilization, which in other words means that you need to have your people build on customer site for at minimum, the marker is 75% of the time.
Yeah.
Over 75%, you're running a really good profitable business. Under that, you may be lucky to make money.
Yeah.
The helicopter business, what is the thing that you're solving for there? What's the problem that you're, kind of, if you crack that problem, you've got a successful company?
It was a passion project, right? I was 14, saw a cat on my string by a helicopter, and I thought, wow, that looks amazing. And my granddad ran a gliding club, whatever, and it just stayed with me. Early 30s, I've come out, I've got some free time. I want to become a helicopter pilot. Why? Probably ego, all those movies, Airwolf. You're going to watch there some guy I want to do that, right? So when people came along and they sat down and go, I want to do my helicopter license, and the first question I go, why? These people are normally successful people. And I go, why? Well, because I want the challenge of learning how to fly, right? And I go, great. But then what are you going to do with it? And they go, well, I don't know, right? 25% of my private clients would go on and buy their own helicopter. And I said, okay, that's great, but where are you going to go to? So I started this, and some had houses they could fly to, some didn't. They had the means, but I said, look, the worst thing you can do is you can go and spend this money, and you could go and sit the exams, and you're going to learn a bunch of stuff, and we'll have some fun doing it. But then what you need to do is you need to have a purpose for doing this at the end of it. The people that fell by the wayside before they actually got their license were the ones that really didn't have that purpose. They started off, the flying's fun, but they're running a company, they've got a family life, friends, then they've got to go and do the 6 exams. It becomes hard, it's not easy. So the ones who fall by the wayside is because they don't have that passion, there's not a purpose. The people who've got a purpose will see it through. Sometimes they fail, they get there, but they get there in the end. What I loved about that second part of that business journey for me was having the ability to lend money to people who didn't have the money, but who were passionate. They wanted it as a career. So to train those people to then go through, and then probably about 70% of them would then go on as a career as a helicopter pilot. And it probably was a reflection of my journey of, I didn't have money. I didn't come from money. I just, I'd worked my way to that position, and then luck fell on my feet. But actually being able to help those people to get through, and then to go and follow their dream and that passion, that was the purpose for me. And that kept me there, every day. And I've met some incredible people, and seen people at their best and at the worst of going through that journey with them. Yeah.
I flirted with the idea of getting my chopper license in my 30s, and it was based on the notion of it being really cool, and it's such an incredible craft. And I did a couple of demo flights, and you end up very quickly with control of this aircraft. And I reflected upon it and went home and talked to my wife, and I said, I'm thinking about maybe getting my chopper pilot's license. She goes, cool, yeah, go and do it. And then I reflected on it longer once I'd dug into what was required. My recollection is the best thing to do was to take 6 weeks and go and study full time.
Yep.
And then at the end of that, you could do your exams. And I'm like, that's a big commitment of time. I think it was about $40,000 in those days to do. So it's a reasonable investment of money as well. And I thought, so where am I going to fly? Okay, well, I live in inner western Ponsonby. I didn't have a holiday home at that point. And so I'm going to fly my mates to Waiheke. They're going to go to the vineyards. They're going to go drinking, and then I can fly them back home again without me having done any of those things other than fly them around the place. I'm not a fisherman. I do enjoy exploring things. And so it became a really quick answer for me that there wasn't really much utility in me getting my license. But I recall some of the processes and the checklists. And so I have this analogy, and I'm curious that I think that there's some kind of comparison points, a metaphor of, getting ready and then flying a helicopter with business itself. Could you talk me through, let's kind of riff on this for a second, Roy.
Sure.
So talk me through some of those key things that enable you to become a successful helicopter pilot, both, on the ground, getting ready and then getting up in the air. So what are some of those key kind of inflection points?
Flying a helicopter, there's a whole bunch of theory, and you're going to learn a whole bunch of wide-ranging topics to keep you safe in the air. So to understand whether to how the machine runs, operates, to what you can do, where you can go, what you can't do, all these kind of things. There's 6, 7 different subjects goes through there. Now, when you come in and then sit in the helicopter, there's a process to go through. You go through, you do your pre-flight. Is the machine fit? Is it, nothing, no nuts and bolts are loose, all those kind of things you're going to sit in the machine. Then you're going to go through a checklist to actually start the helicopter. You start the helicopter, then you're going to go through another checklist, and I still remember it off by heart, of how to get that thing into the air. And again, which is what was taught to me and ingrained by me by John, who used to be head of the training wing for New Zealand Helicopter Squadron, of going, just do that. Don't deviate. Do that checklist. You miss one. So, and you get yourself in the air and then you stop. Right. Am I stable? I'm sitting in a hover. Everything's under control. Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I need to move over there because that's where I'm going to take off from. That's all you're going to do. All you need to think about is now I'm going to turn this 90 degrees. I'm going to hover over there about 100 meters. Then I'm going to turn another 90 degrees. Then I'm going to stop. That's all you're doing. From a business perspective, I think what has got me through both the GFC and then coming through some other things of going, if I make sure that I've got money coming into the business, that's one thing. I'm paying for the machinery to keep that, even when there's other conflicting things for that money, I've got to make sure I put that, $150 per hour for that machine into this separate bank account because it's owned by a separate company, a helicopter is. So because if I do that, then I've got the money that when it needs maintaining, which in their maintenance hungry, that the money is sitting there. And I think that discipline of picking up to the hover, stopping and thinking, that's all I'm doing right now. I'm not going off. I might be going to Waiheke, right? But all I'm doing in this moment is I'm doing this. And I think from a business perspective, sometimes it's easy to go, I'm going over here, but you miss those steps along the journey of actually how that's going to get you over there.
Mm. Yeah.
It does correlate, actually.
Yes.
It's the discipline that you need.
Yes.
And we're entrepreneurs, and a lot of people I've trained, serial entrepreneurs, very successful people, and you want to go, but I'm going over there. Yeah, you are, but I've pulled them back. And the amount of conversations I've had with people when they're coming in there, they're rushing in, they've been late or they're on the phone because they've got a deal going on and they're talking to someone. I said, stop. You've just got to stop and think, what are you doing now? Because in the helicopter game and aviation and a lot of other things, if you don't stop and think about what you're doing right now and in the moment, there's a real chance you can kill yourself. In 1 second in a helicopter, the blades can stop. And it's then how you react will be the difference between whether you live or you don't. And that's really dramatic way of doing it. But I think sometimes in business, we just, we've got all this passion and we want to go and we want to run. But actually, sometimes you got to stop and get the checklist out and going, am I doing those steps to make sure I'm safe, that I can still go in that direction, but actually I'm doing it in a more considered way?
Yes.
Which is counterintuitive, I think, to being an entrepreneur or a business leader.
Yeah. So I think it depends on at which stage of the journey you're at and which type of business it is that you're running.
Yeah.
So I reflect a lot on the nature of checklists. And one of the things that I do is help business owners build value inside that business asset. And a critical part of value building is about having effective processes, systems, which will then enable you to automate.
Yep.
We live in the world of AI. And I've got a strong view on this, is that everyone's kind of experimenting with AI, which is cool, and they're trying to automate aspects of their business. And I'm like, okay, so what are you automating? What measures are you trying to improve across your business? And show me the process that you're automating. They don't have them.
No.
And so a starting point is actually a checklist. So to build a process, and this is a real simple, easy takeaway for you watching at home, is that to build automation inside your business, you start with a checklist, you convert that into a process, you then understand how that fits into your entire business system, and then you go, what automation tools are available? What are the measures that we're trying to achieve from this automation? And then make sure that you have the discipline and the rigor of measuring that thing on a regular basis to ensure that you get there. And a lot of these are akin to what you're talking about with the helicopter. The other thing you mentioned is be present to what you're up to and be clear about what your intention is.
Yes.
And all of these are great metaphors for running a business. And so the last one was preparation as well. Be prepared for what it is that you're up to, and also have an alternate plan B in case something goes wrong and the weather turns in on you and you need to go somewhere different from where you were going to go, and you have to make a decision about some form of event that might be outside of your control. So you then have the ability to pull that out of the drawer, even if you don't necessarily use it, but at least you can reflect upon that plan. I want to touch on the exit.
Yes.
So a couple of years ago, you sold the company?
2019, 6 months before COVID.
Okay, that was great timing. That was lucky timing.
Unbelievable.
So what prompted you to sell, and what was that journey of selling like?
This is my second go at it. 2013, still coming out of the effects of the GFC, marriage, all those kind of things, all that melting pot. And I was approached by a Kiwi guy who was working with a Chinese gentleman, very successful businessman over there. And he wanted to take civil aviation, helicopter aviation to China. To order to do that, he needed personnel, but he also needed certification and whatever. Anyway, so then he went, well, I want to buy your business. And so we went down that journey. I went over to China for a week, shadowed him. Interesting, he said, yep, I want to buy your business. We did a whole bunch of legals. So again, back to that trust but verify position. We did a whole bunch of legals, and then we had a signing ceremony in my office. I had Mark Mitchell, our local MP, a great friend. He came along. Everyone else had the champagne all ready to go. Mark got up, gave a speech. The gentleman got up and made a speech going, this is going to be great for Chinese-New Zealand relationships, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I haven't read all the contracts, so I'm not going to be signing today. So that was a massive, at the time, a big WTF moment of going, because I now gear myself up to exit and then help this guy build his business. But it spurred me on to going, well, where am I going now? Subsequently, then obviously I went on, and I grew the business by that 300+%. So that all came great. But then 2017, 2018, I'm feeling I'm getting stale now. I'm going, I've done this for so long. I love it. It was my identity, and I know from some of the other podcasts, guys that you've had on here, and Melissa, of going, I'd wrapped all of my identity around this business, and subsequently, we know I'm doing it before, but I've still felt that loss of identity of who am I now. So I was approached by a very successful gentleman who had sold his business for 150 million. He built that up from scratch, became Australasia's biggest aviation company in their space. And he went out, probably retired, and then he went and bought 2 helicopters, but he needed somewhere for them to be. He came up, he bought a hangar at North Shore Airfield, and then he was going to do that. And I said, well, but you can't operate them. Commercially. What do you mean? I said, well, because there's an exclusive agreement to operate out of this airfield, and I held one of them. And it was something that I had again from that period back in 2010 to 12, because I nearly got pushed out of business. And so I went on to the board of the airport. So I was on there for 8 years. And part of that was to actually see the threats coming. And I also recognized that my license agreement was the true value of my business.
Interesting.
Was the position. North Shore, the population is growing. People are moving out more this way as this will become, a very, this is a suburb now. It will become a suburb. So I had to protect that. It was the license to operate that I saw as where my exit was going to be from nearly, being shafted in that period. So he came along, he wanted to operate. I said, well, you can't. So kind of went away. Lovely conversation. And then they came back about, well, what about if can we operate together? I said, well, we can do. How does that look? And then they came back quite quickly afterwards and they went, well, what about if we buy your business? So it was early 2019. And I went, yeah, but we only want this part of it, which was the license agreement and a little bit. I went, no, you either buy all of me or none of me. And that included the helicopters that I owned at the time. It was either an all or nothing scenario. So over a period of a couple of weeks, we thrashed out some numbers and they went, yep, okay. And then there was a 3-month period where, again, we're doing phenomenal business and then just ran myself into ragged. But then, end of June 2019, the deal was done. Check was in the bank the next day. And then they wanted to keep me on as their CEO and chief pilot, which I did for a couple of years. It wasn't an earn-out period. It was
salaried. Yep.
Salary gig.
Yep.
So
there's a couple of points that I love about that. The fact that you'd had the very strategic view on what the risk was for the business and what the most important aspect of the business was, and you therefore protected that thing through taking a governance role, through ensuring that there was structures and processes around how those things were allocated to others.
Correct.
And so you really shored up your position, which I don't think a lot of people do or think in that way. And so I think that was a really canny thing for you to do at that stage, being approached to be bought rather than taking an asset out to sell is a wonderful position to end up in. And no doubt that had a reasonably big influence on the consequence of quick DD and then money being paid super fast, no earn out. And then you got to continue operating in a space that you probably still enjoyed. I know that you still fly today.
Yes.
So it wasn't like you had become sick of flying a helicopter. I mean, who's going to get sick of flying a helicopter? It's awesome.
Yep.
If anyone hasn't had the chance, go and fly a helicopter. It's cool and exciting. And so being able to, get yourself into the position financially, it made sense. You could exit. Plus, also, I'd imagine over that couple of years, as you were the CEO and chief pilot, you probably had the chance to regroup in your life as well and go, what does it mean now, and where do I go from here? What was that journey like working for someone else?
It was actually okay, but it was a big, 1st of July. I went, I'm going to take a week off. And that was fine. And then probably found out that I had a heart condition. And then 2 weeks later, I had a heart operation, which was an interesting backstory, in story to that one. But then I found myself okay, but I found myself then I was running it and I was present, and they had great ambition of building other things, and we went off and they wanted to bring the fixed wing side of it, and they had so we did some of that stuff, but it was an interesting period of, and when I reflect on it, I probably didn't give my best. Yes, I've got the money, and it wasn't a case of I got the money, thank you very much, but I think I just needed time. And then after that 2 years, it was just right, I now need, and I took a year off, and it was all through COVID as well, but actually when I took a year off, and then there was subsequently, well, what am I doing? Who am I now as a person? Where am I going? I'm mid-50s, and I still, have that passion now of going, what now? The money was nice, it's paid the mortgage off, but it's not enough for me to go and, go off and completely,
You're not going to buy an island.
No, I'm not going to buy an island. Less Matt. So as much as I'd love to, possibly, but so I'm still. I need to, and I want to have projects and do things and earn money and give back and help others, but also I want to, and I'm probably still in some ways finding where is my part now? What am I now going to do for the next 5 years? And I've got all of this experience. I want to channel it in the right way and actually create something again now, or help someone else actually get a project and get it through and and be part of that success. So I'm not averse of actually, going and working for someone else, but it's going to be a lot more on, this is who I am. This is where I'm at. My kids are really important. I've got other interests as well, but can I help you and be part of your journey? Then I'd love to do that. So yeah. And then I'm excited by that, of what the future is.
Yeah.
But I definitely went through a period of going, now what? Who am I? And even so, my kids still say, why did I sell the business? They still say that. And I go, for these reasons. And it helped me, if I'd had that business through COVID, I didn't have enough money in the bank to be able to get through that. It would have been a completely different end story for me these last 5 years if I hadn't had that buyout at that time.
Yeah, very fortuitous timing.
Yeah.
I believe now that timing is actually the most important aspect of life, investment, business. I used to think it was the founding team, talking from an investor lens, and then the quality of the idea, and then your kind of plan to execute. Now I go, actually timing is the most important thing. So I understand that. I've had the good fortune to be able to, have two kind of semi-retirements, once in my early 40s and then the second in my late 40s. And I learned very quickly about myself that idle hands make devil's work, is the expression, and I'm far better to be applied to something meaningful. I talk about the tyranny of drive from time to time. Matty, you mentioned a second ago, he and I have talked about this just this week, actually. And drive is an interesting thing. If you have it, then it's useful, but it doesn't leave you. And I refer to it as like the monkey on your back, that is a jockey who is riding you and constantly whipping you. Those that don't have drive or motivation go, you're lucky. And I say, well, maybe. But also there's this thing that keeps you going. And so what I've learned about myself is that I need to channel that drive into something meaningful and in service of others, thus, this podcast and the work that I do, and some other bits and pieces. And so, I can totally relate to what you're saying. Last question for you, Roy, is and you've watched the show, so I know that you're familiar with it. It's the In an Alternate Universe. There's another Roy Crane.
Yes.
And he's also tall and devilishly handsome, but he's chosen a different career that brings him deep satisfaction. What is that career?
I'm going to be different and play devil's advocate here. It'll be two things. One would be, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Astronaut. Love it.
All my life, from the get-go, which would be the fast jet pilot into being the astronaut, 100%. The other one would be a chef.
Cool. You love food?
I love food.
Yes.
And it's my happy place. Being in the kitchen, creating, is my happy place.
That's Tina, my wife. Her version of meditation is to go home and cook a meal. She really loves the process of reflecting on what's there, creating something from nothing, bringing something beautiful together. And then, of course, the flavors and the mix and, the experience that you get from eating the food. Roy, a rich and varied conversation, as I imagined and hoped that it would be. I appreciate your candor and openness in coming on the show today, and I'm very grateful that we had to have this conversation.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you for having me. It's been lovely.
Cheers. If you enjoy these episodes, I hope you do. I love filming them, and the guests always say what a great and often cathartic experience it is for them. Then please do like and share. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm open to connect requests, and occasionally I get emails from people as well asking me about my experience around certain subjects. So please do like and share, and continue to follow the show. I really appreciate your ears.